Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Sincerely Agile with Mary. Now, on this podcast, if you're joining us for the first time, this is the platform where we want to learn, unlearn, and relearn, make change agents of ourselves. And of course, it's a podcast where we want to be awesome and wholesome together. Today, we're looking at Agile beyond software development. And who better to have this conversation with me than an author that has actually written a book about, software in non-software teams. And I'm just going to welcome him to the podcast. Hello, Gil.
Hello, Mary. Good to be
How
here.
are you?
Terrific. Thank you so much
Nice to
for
have you.
inviting me. Yes,
Oh, it is such a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for honoring our invite. How are you doing?
it's a wonderful weekend. Sun is shining. I'm hopeful. I'm optimistic. It's a good day.
I'm also quite optimistic because I woke up this morning, it was nice and bright. I mean, even in as much as it was still cold. But for me, it doesn't matter how cold it is. If the skies are bright, then it feels good. It looks good and it feels good.
Yes, and we were just chatting about the human side of Agile. I mean, it's something as little as the barometric pressure, right? And are we having a cloudy day or a good day? Already we act differently, right?
Absolutely.
If we were resources, none of that would matter,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely. It does make a whole lot of difference. It's such a pleasure to have you, Gil. We have people joining us on LinkedIn already. We are streaming on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. And I like to carry our audience along. I've got Ronke here, I've got Victoria, I've got a few people joining us from LinkedIn. Hello, Grace. Hello, Ronke. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, Gil, I am excited to have you here because you have written three books. Three books.
Hmm.
That's a lot of books. And it's a lot because I haven't even written one, right? But before we, just forge ahead, let me read your bio and introduce you to our audience.
Hmm.
Gil Broza helps tech leaders cultivate meaningful agility in product development. He also supports their non software colleagues in creating real business agility in their teams. He has helped close to 100 organizations make Agile work well in their unique context by using his Right Fit Agile system, which focuses on what really matters for agility, which is mindset, culture, and leadership. Companies also invite him for specialized support, such as strategic assessments, facilitation of large collaborative events, and keynotes for internal conferences. He is the author of three acclaimed books: The Agile Mindset, The Human Side of Agile, and Agile for Non Software Teams. And he lives in Toronto. You are welcome to Sincerely Agile with Mary. Now, let me crack on, Gil. My first question to you. And I often like asking this question, especially when I have, an agile professional, with me. How did your journey start in this space? How did it start? Tell us about it.
It started 22 years ago when, yes, 2000. I was made a manager of a small team. It was a team of developers, and I also received oversight of the technical documentation team. So I had like 6 people. And I went and I took courses: how to manage people, how to manage projects, how to use Microsoft Project. That was a dead end. Uh, and I quickly realized that a lot of what I was learning just didn't sit well with me.
Hmm.
And I found myself managing differently than what I had seen around me. We were meeting every day, sitting down. We were working from short lists of tasks and bigger activities. I was connecting people who were otherwise just sitting at their own desks,
Hmm.
and it was all very much driven by doing work that matters, not just there's a deadline. Right? So that's how I started. And later on, I ended up with a company that was using extreme programming, XP.
Hmm.
And that's where I really cut my teeth on automated testing and refactoring, all in C++, which at that point did not make any of these practices easy.
Hmm.
But I loved it. I loved how simple, straightforward, team-focused everything was. Then I ended up at another company. I was managing a team, and I was able to basically do anything I wanted. And it was full on XP plus additional ideas that we came up with, all in a scientific environment. We were building tools for the scientists. And slowly but surely, I kind of expanded my knowledge, my experience, my abilities, and in 2004, I became an agile coach.
Wow. What
Yeah.
a journey that was. I like that, you started from the early days of XP, extreme programming. And you also said that you pretty much could do what you liked. So you had the latitude to experiment with the team, right?
Well, yes and no. When I was made manager, the latitude only extended to what my VP, who was my boss, agreed to.
Okay.
So when she caught me in the hallway one day talking to the product manager, she gave me hell. That was she told me, he will not tell you what to do. I will tell you what to do. I I'm sure you recognize where this approach comes from.
Yeah.
At the other,
Command and control.
yes, exactly. And so I could do quite a diverse set of practices and use a different process with my team. But in terms of what are we working on, that came from the boss.
Mm.
At the company where we did tooling and software for scientific work, my boss was actually an engineer, and he told me from the get-go, look, I trust you. If I see any disasters waiting to happen, I'll tell you, but you're free to do what you need. And that was great.
Mm.
Later on, actually, I got a different boss who was even more hands-off. And this is, you know, th- there's a story from that period which actually shows a little bit of my revolutionary side. We were supposed to send in weekly reports of what we did and so on, just status reports for my entire team. And I got the sense that nobody was reading them. So one week I just sent in the template. I didn't fill it in. And
Nobody noticed.
nobody noticed. And then the second week came along and I figured, okay, I'll save time again. I'll just send in the template. I mean, you can send an empty file, but the
Hmm.
template has size, right? That's 11K. And again, nothing happened. And I did this for the third week. And then I had my one-on-one with him. And I said, well, how did you like my reports? And like, it was clear that he had never opened them. And so I came clean. And he said, so I don't need your reports. Just stop doing that. So that was lovely as far as I'm concerned, because it was really a case of make life simpler. Just get good work done.
Mm. And that's an interesting story because that just goes to confirm what we've always known, that we often just do things or we keep doing stuff just because we've always done them. I mean, you've sent 3 reports, template, empty reports, nobody noticed because they never read it anyway. That's number one. Number two, this whole idea of command and control is
Mhm.
an illusion that they are actually in control, right? Because if they were really in control, they would have seen that you had sent 3 empty templates, right? That's another thing. And when you say, when you want to be in control, I find this as, quite an anti pattern because here you are as an organization, you've spent so much money recruiting the best people into your organization, the
Yes.
best people. And you and I know recruitment doesn't come cheap. And then you bring all these amazing people into your organizations, and you are literally giving them rules instead of principles to operate by. You're literally saying, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't tap into your creativity. Just stay there, wait for me, and do as directed. It just does not make sense. But
But
an interesting story. Yeah, go on.
I think there's actually an additional moral to the story.
Yeah.
I was asked to send in a status report because every manager sent in status reports. Now, some of the managers, they oversaw people who did cloning and purification and all the other stuff in, proteomics. Like I'm even trying to dredge up the word from so
Mm,
long ago. What I was doing in my team, we did bioinformatics, more of the product development side, facilitating operations and so on. It didn't make sense to paint us all with the same brush.
yeah,
So the lesson there is, different groups in the organization might require different ways of working,
absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
When you're doing lab work, you need a clean environment. It was effectively a production line, you need to manage them separately than how you manage your software developers.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So we need to look at every single, I mean, that is why we say how you do transformation for one organization is totally different from another. And even when you go into an organization, you have 10 teams. They are very 10 unique teams
Mhm.
doing perhaps different things. And that is why you can't just, roll out agile, as it were. You need to take the, peculiar context of each team into account. Great response there. Great response. Now, how would you define agile? Some say it's a framework. Some say it's a methodology. Some say it's a way of working. Give us your definition of agile.
Okay. I define Agile as an approach to work that optimizes for human interaction, collaboration, frequent value delivery, and adaptation. It is manifested in cross-functional teams with frequent touch points,
Mm,
short planning cycles,
mm.
learning cycles, clean work, and a whole lot of talking and transparency grounded in safety, transparency, respect, servant leadership, and some of the other people principles. By the way, you use the term way of working. I define way of working as the combination of mindset and how we implement it.
Mindset and how we implement it. I mean, you've mentioned a whole lot of stuff there. Agile is all about, it's a way of working.
Mhm.
Agile is the way we show up.
Yes.
Agile is, collaboration. It's a safe space. It's how we show respect for one another.
Mhm.
It's a whole lot of stuff. It's not a methodology. It's not like Prince 2. It's more of how we show up, how we behave, how
Yes,
we interact.
exactly.
And when you look at the first value of the manifesto, individuals and interactions, and I often say I don't think it's a mistake that is the first value, because that really is what agile is all about: individuals and interactions.
I know for a fact that it's intentionally the first.
Okay.
Back at Agile 2011, Salt Lake City, I believe, I go every year to the conference. They had a
Mm,
panel with almost all the signatories of the Agile Manifesto, all the ones who would show up. I think it was like 15 or 16.
right.
And there was a question from the audience, why did you put that value first? And they said, no, that was intentional. It didn't start that way. Then we moved it. We decided this one has to be first because it's at the root of everything.
It is at the root of everything. And you know what? Every time I look at the four values and 12 principles, I go, wow, they really got it right, because it has endured. It's been over 20 years now. The values and principles have endured, and they have endured beyond where it started, which was, the software
Hmm.
environment. Yeah, it has endured. Um, which actually takes me to my next question. Agile started in software development, but the principles have held up for other sectors. Why do you think that is? And I'm asking this question also because your book, I actually have it here. I'm just going to grab it. Your book, Agile for Non-Software Teams, has actually done a great job of almost expanding
Hmm.
those values and principles so that we can embrace them, if you like, in non-software environment. So if I can hear from you, please.
Yes, please. So first, I need to define something here. A mindset is fundamentally how we make choices, and it's made up of three components.
Mm,
The primary two are values and beliefs. Values are what we care about, what we optimize for, the few things that are the most important to us as we work. And beliefs are our narrative, like what we hold true about us, the world, users, technology, our product or service, our SLAs, whatever. They make certain principles appropriate.
mm,
For instance, collaboration, deferring decisions to the last responsible moment, simplicity, transparency, effective first and efficient second, outcome thinking, all the good agile principles. The principles are closer to day-to-day decision making. The principles in agile carry over nicely to many other sectors
mhm.
because of what gives rise to those principles, which are the values and beliefs. In other words, they live in context. If you were to do waterfall, in waterfall, we have principles such as plan the work and work the plan, work sequentially, hand off, control, everybody is a resource, and so on and so forth. Those principles make sense because of the waterfall value system, the predictability, standardization, process first, and so on. But in Agile, we have these four, right? Collaboration, people first, adaptation, frequent value delivery.
Yeah.
And now we can ask, in another sector, would these values make sense? Would they help us be more successful? We're not taking them on just because somebody said so, or because it's cool, or because the competitors are doing it. Will working this way make sense? Will
for
it
our context?
exactly?
For our context, yeah.
Exactly. And so, for instance, you know that nowadays there is a lot of Agile in marketing. Marketing is not all one big blob of the exact same activity, just like software development isn't. If you're marketing a TV station, if you're marketing an insurance product, if you're marketing the next amazing new tech product, all of those are so very different. You would probably want to pursue somewhat different values. I'll give you an example. I have a client right now. They're in the 3D visualization space. Their top value is not customer orientation, which is kind of generic. It's customer productivity. That's how they decide what to work on. And so we have the Agile value system. That's sort of a base model. Like when you pick out a car, there's a base model. This is the base model.
Yeah.
And when you look at another sector, the sector you're in, the company you're in, the specific people you have, now you can ask, well, would these make sense for us? Should we change them in some way? Should we pick a different set? And there are actually many situations where they don't apply at all.
Exactly.
I'll give you an example. I've worked with a finance group. Finance is usually made up of two components. One looks at the past, one looks at the future. The past is like the bookkeeping and accounting. You should not be Agile there because none of the four Agile values makes any sense there. Maybe putting people first, but that's fine. You still need a standardized process because there should not be a variation. There should not be surprises. There's not even an obvious customer to kind of collaborate with. That's why we see the Agile approach take on so many sectors, because people are realizing that that value system actually does make sense. They're not used to it. They need to think about it a lot. There's definitely a lot of friction on the way there, but it does make sense.
It does. It does. And, taking our context into account is so important, because Agile is not a silver bullet. And Ready to, that's your book there. The book is amazing. Someone's already asking, is the book on Amazon? And someone on your behalf is already saying, yes, it is. Great response there. Great response there. Now, we also hear this a lot. Be agile. Don't just do agile, okay? Can you tell us more about this statement? Because we hear it a lot. What does this mean in reality to say, be agile?
I'm going to start with this do Agile, because when you say that let me back up. When you say that Agile is like values and principles, what is there to do? So I think that when people say do Agile, they think do Scrum, because that's the most popular and recognized and written about.
Yes.
So, look, I had heard about be versus do for several years before the book, but only when I wrote it and I really developed this mindset model that I was describing, did it occur to me that that is the fundamental distinction. That when you are being agile, you are operating according to the choices inherent to the agile mindset. So for instance, if you are, let's say, in a meeting with your team, and you are engaging, participating, facilitating in a way that implements, facilitates, invites collaboration, safety, consensus, and so on, you can be said to be agile in that situation. Now, presumably, you act this way in many other situations, and so you can be said to generally be agile. The do is what we usually think of as going through the motions, and the motions typically are the Scrum motions, again, because that's what most people know.
Yeah, the practices.
Yes, the thing is that you can follow the motions of extreme programming as well. You can write unit tests that don't actually serve agility. That's
Mm-hmm.
very possible, and I've seen this done plenty. You can go through the motions of Kanban. I do Kanban. I have a board with stickies on it, and I have this number at the top that says 18. That's my WIP limit. Now, we know that it's useless, but I have a WIP limit. And so we can go through the motions of anything. It's really the choices, again, I say mindset, but another word would be choices. The choices that guide my doing, if they align with the agile thinking, the collaboration, adaptation, and so on.
Exactly, the people side of it, how we interact, how we create safe spaces. For me, that also comes under
Yeah,
the umbrella of, being, you
for
know,
sure, for sure.
it's not enough that we are, we have a velocity, or we have consistent deliverables. We need to create spaces where everyone can bring their best selves to work. So for me, psychological safety, it really is critical
Right.
in that space.
But you can create psychological safety, and you can be an awesome servant leader and still not be agile.
You don't have to be agile. It
Right.
doesn't have to be,
Yeah.
like you said in your book, so much happened even before the Agile Manifesto came
Mhm.
about that if we look back today, if we want to call it agile, then it was agile. It may not have been called agile, right? And these days, sometimes even going into organizations, you sometimes don't even want to bring up the word agile, right? Because when we go into
Absolutely.
organizations, what exactly are we going there to do? Because agile is never the goal. The goal is, what exactly do you want to achieve as an organization? What are your business objectives, right? What are you trying to achieve? And seeing agile as a tool, as an enabler to help you get there. I mean, we've packaged it all as though safety only comes with agile. No, we emotional intelligence was there
Right.
before agile. you know
Yes. I'd like to offer a perspective here.
yeah,
So in Agile, we have four primary values.
yeah,
None of those values emerged with Agile, right? So we've just talked about people before process, but
yeah,
even being adaptive,
yeah,
I mean, that's no big surprise. Collaborating with the person who benefits from your work, or the person who asks for your work, that's like customer collaboration in the Agile
hmm,
space. Again, no major surprise there.
yeah,
What's unique about Agile, I think, is that it packages the four. And that's why I
mm,
was saying that you can have, for instance, great servant leadership,
hmm,
but still not quite being agile, because what you're missing is on the work side of things. The
mm,
work in terms of making a difference frequently, the work in terms of deferring decisions to later and making them when there's still not too much risk, but you're better informed.
yeah,
This idea of hanging everything on outcome. When you put all of these together, and of course there's more to say, that makes you agile on both the people side of things and the work side of
the
things.
work side of things. Absolutely,
Yes.
absolutely. I believe we have a question here for you. Once organizations have found values that fit their context, what set of activities do you recommend they put in place to help teams embody these values?
Okay. Yes. Thank you for the question. I can actually describe something that I have been doing with my client now, who is partly in Canada and partly in Europe. And we started with identifying values. That's the client with the customer productivity. And then we said, okay, based on that, what are some of the principles and guardrails that we expect the teams to implement? Now, all the team leads were part of the conversation. It wasn't a conversation with the whole company. That would not have been practical, but it was with enough people, enough leaders. And we came up with practically there's two slides. That's what they showed in the kickoff. One is with principles, one is with guardrails. And all of those are statements as to what do we favor when we're making decisions. For instance, don't let your colleagues be stuck on a piece of work for too long. Don't go more than a couple of weeks between planning opportunities. Okay? Things like that. What that does, it creates a boundary, pretty expansive boundary, right? It's not controlling. It allows the teams to do pretty much whatever makes sense to them within those boundaries. So the social contract here, as it were, is that management, as representing the organization, says, in order for us to get to the objectives that we're setting, we think that following these values makes sense. Please operate within these principles. The teams, and well, basically any actor in the system, has a lot of leeway and a lot of decision-making ability within those boundaries.
Hmm.
And what we also do is we reflect frequently, every couple of
Mm,
weeks. There's a lot of sharing, and we tell the stories and so on. But notice how different this is than the typical mold where there's a playbook or somebody prescribes process or
right.
there's people to enforce process. It's not even about process. Like you were saying, it's how we engage as human beings
Mhm.
with some criteria as to how do we choose work and move work along.
Well answered there. I hope that satisfies your question, Mark. My next question for you. Um, Transformations.
Mhm.
Um, there have been a lot of successes in the agile space, no doubt,
Yes.
which is also why a lot of organizations, yeah, I mean, which is also why we have a lot of transformations everywhere today, and also why non-software, organizations are also going through agile transformations because they have essentially seen the benefit that comes with, embracing that way of working. But can you give us two major mistakes that you think contributes to the failure of agile transformation? What are the two top things that organizations are doing wrong today that is
Mhm.
contributing to, their lack of success as it should be?
I have two. I'm going
Okay.
to start with the easy one, and then I'm going to get to the one that doesn't make me any friends. So the easy one is we try to make a transformation by fixing the teams. Transformation happens by transforming teams. That's a primary mistake because teams work in a context. There's the organizational context. There's also the smaller context with their direct management and vertical product line, whatever. They operate under certain expectations and pressures and constraints,
Mm-hmm.
and you can change their process, but they will make choices, it's that word again, based on
Mm-hmm.
what's valued in the environment. So you can bring an army of agile coaches, teach people how to do things, tell them what's right, and so on and so forth, but ultimately the teams will behave in ways that respect the existing, let's say, regime,
Mm.
right? If the regime has to do with deadlines and you better do what you promised, we call this accountability, and
Yeah.
that stuff, then that's what people will work on. For instance, dates versus adaptability. Those two are sometimes in tension,
Yeah.
sometimes not. Usually they are in tension.
Yeah.
The organization needs to say, which one are we favoring in this context?
Exactly.
And so teams will respond to the pressures around them. And so if you only fix the teams, you don't fix the environment around them, you haven't really done anything much. And in fact, you do damage. You do damage because it's a false start. You lose a lot of goodwill, and you confuse people because they
Mm.
think, well, is this what Agile is like? Okay, it's the same thing as before, just with 2 week sprints and,
Sprint. Yeah.
and with lots of meetings. I don't want that.
Yeah.
Now, the other mistake, and that's the one that kind of runs counter to what's very popular in the Agile consulting space, is this idea called shuhari.
Mm-hmm.
So shuhari, to our listeners who are not familiar with it,
Mm-hmm.
is a learning model from martial arts. And there's a lot to say about it, but fundamentally, you go gradually, and you start at the step where the first step, shu, where you kind of follow the instructions from the master. You get the hang of it.
Mm-hmm.
You follow the motions. You get the hang of it. Then we'll get concerned with theory.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how it came to be that this is such a promoted model in the Agile community, because it has no, evidence of actually working out, and it doesn't even make sense. The reason it doesn't make sense is for the same reason I said before. If you just go through the motions, but you're still optimizing for, again, the dates, the standardization, the predictability, get stuff right the first time, does it matter that you write your stories a certain way, or you call your fellow workers a team, or that you show up to the same meetings? It doesn't.
It doesn't.
It doesn't. And so what I was describing about my client is really how I approach transformation always, which is you have to start with awareness, help people realize what the target uh, approach or mindset is, decide how you might implement it, and gradually get better at both.
Mm.
So it's not just to say, well, you'll see, we'll work in cross-functional teams, we'll release software every 2 weeks, we'll blah, blah, blah. But what do you get from that? Do you get the message that that is important, that when you have to choose between option A and option B, both of which have pros and cons, then how do I choose? I don't know. All I know is that I have sprint planning and I need to cram my sprint with points into some arbitrary goal.
And that's where the principles come in, isn't it?
Exactly.
That is where,
Yes.
as organizations, what we need are not rules. We need principles, and we need our teams to have the latitude to apply those principles to then make the best decisions at any point in time.
Mm-hmm.
Now, however, I want you to expand on Shuhari, right? Because in the early days, even up until a few years ago, Shuhari is a thing or was still a thing for me. And I also used it to help my cohort, if you like, understand the stages of learning. Okay. Shu being, follow the rule, break the rule and make your own rules, so to speak, coming from martial arts. And we also see transformations using this as a maturity model sometimes, if you
Mm-hmm.
like, to say, okay, we can say they're at the shoe level right now, or they're at the high level or the real level. And I've also seen some, high level phases talk about crawling, walking, and
Mm-hmm.
flying, and things like that, which you can almost understand why they want to use those metaphors sometimes. But tell us a little bit more about that. What is the main, should I say, misinformation coming from Shuhari?
The lack of emphasis on this is not the level that matters. The emphasis should be on the level that does matter, which is, again, how we make our choices. Will we focus on customer productivity at the
Mhm.
expense of the deadline, or will we release on the date, whether we run people ragged, or we postpone 100 different bugs or something like that? What matters? And you don't get that message just from showing up to sprint cycles.
Mhm. Yeah, but it's not just about showing up to sprint cycle though. Sometimes when we pull this out, we're trying to see how mature. I mean, for me, I feel a retrospective is enough from time to time. Run a retrospective and to see how well teams are embracing the agile mindset, and how well they are engaging, if you like, in the practices.
And that works for me. So the way
Mm,
I typically assess maturity
mhm.
is I look for the principles that would make sense for them, and
For
I
them.
look at how much and how well
Mm,
they are implementing them. So it's not
right.
about do they have a demo meeting? I could care less if they have a demo meeting. I do care if they get
Mm,
useful, actionable feedback when it's
mm,
still valid.
mm.
Do they do something about it? I don't care that they do retrospectives. What I do care is that there is evidence of trying to get better on a continuous basis. If that
Absolutely.
happens over Slack, be my guest.
As long as they understand the need to, the importance of feedback and the need to learn quickly, that's what matters. And for their context, what works for them. I mean, I remember putting out a poll on LinkedIn, and I think it was a question around retrospective. And I said, do you need, I can't even remember the question, but it was around retrospective. And I was asking, do you still need a recurring retrospective, even if you have a matured agile team?
Hmm.
And boy, you should have seen all the various, answers that came in. And some people think, you just have to keep doing these things. I mean, for me, even for a stand up, if as a team you think you don't need 5 day stand up, so be it. Because the way I see agile frameworks, if you like, agile practices, is that they are self correcting. When you come to have your retrospectives, if you're inspecting and adapting, you will know what is working for you and what isn't working for you. And that is why you're a self organizing team, right? You will figure it out.
Well, yeah, but to a limit.
Mm,
Because what if you're implementing these practices like
hmm
daily, like retro, and you call them best practices, which means there's nothing to improve upon them, and you think that you're supposed to do them a certain way, and
mm,
you think that somebody is supposed to run interference for you, like out of the
mm,
stand up,
hmm
or escalate for you, and so on,
mm,
that is actually self-limiting.
mm, mm. True. Is there a special code for Mary's people? I'd like to recommend the book for my organization. Well, we might want to take that offline if you want to do a bulk buy. Did you see that?
Yeah. So, Michael, if you want to contact me,
Okay.
let's
So
talk.
contact him directly. He's on LinkedIn anyway.
Yes.
Um, exactly. I use the crawling etc, but for the stages in transformation. Okay. Someone here saying hello, hello. Retros, absolutely. I love retros. Back to my questions now. Which one should I pick for you right now? This one. Given agile is not a silver bullet, which we have emphasized already, how should we get started for better results? And of course, it doesn't matter whether it's a technology organization, software,
Right.
or
Right.
marketing or whatever. How should we get started for better results? Give us a few tips.
Yes. So it's funny. This is actually the chapter sequence in this book. So I'm just going to mention the main points.
Yeah.
First, we need awareness. Everybody on the team, and when I say the team, it can be in multiple teams, doesn't matter,
Yeah.
needs to understand the significance of a choosing a different way of working. They need to realize the difference between that and what they're doing right now, and not on
Mm,
the superficial level of, well, I use work breakdown structures, now I'll use boards. It's not about that. You need to work through concerns. You need to figure out where to try it for the first time. In tech, we would usually do pilots, like start
mhm,
with this team or maybe this program. When it comes to a non-software environment, there might be pockets of a department or business unit or something like that, where you would say, let's just start here. It's not so much a pilot project, but it's a pilot subset of the work. You need to be ready. You need to get leadership bought in and on board.
mm,
This happens before you even get the team on board. Okay, so there's definitely preparation for the journey. People need to learn enough about Agile to get started,
mhm,
which to me, again, means both people and work. How do we move work along? How do we do work that matters?
mm.
How do we engage together? And I know, because I teach it like this, you can teach all of it without mentioning a single Scrum or Kanban practice.
Absolutely.
So there's that. And then you want to design your initial way of working. So once people understand what they're getting themselves into, there is again, we have articulated how we want to be going forward. We articulate the guardrails. Now we can design, process, touch points, some practices. We might borrow from Scrum, we might borrow from Kanban or anywhere else, but we need to pick the ones that make sense for us given what we have chosen. And then you just support the team during the first few months. It's good to start with a kickoff, focus on finishing stuff together. That's really important as a good starting point. Make working agreements and so on. And then you
Yeah.
can expand out.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so important to start with leadership because when we talk about transformations, we're also talking about changing our culture, right? Otherwise, nothing changes really. If the culture doesn't change, then we're only going to be putting boards here and there and using tools, and not much will change in terms of human behavior.
Yes.
Because for me, I often say that when you start talking about transformations, what you're really saying that is you want people to change. And if you want people to change, you're talking about your culture. You're talking about the people side of your organization. How do you make decisions? Who is involved? When you embrace this new way of working, how are we going to make decisions? What, principles are going to be guiding the way we work? So leadership is key, because they really need to walk the talk, so to speak, not just support the transformation, but to actively also show that the way they show up is different or is changing,
Yeah.
because of course it does take time to change, isn't it? It is a
Yes.
process. And
Oh,
you talked about preparing, so it's a journey.
absolutely. It's a journey. It has multiple legs. It will go
Mhm.
wrong. It will take time. It will
Yeah,
take longer than you want,
yeah.
and on and on and on. I do want to actually tie two things together here. I keep
Mm,
saying mindset. You brought up the matter of culture.
mhm.
Mindset, when it is pervasive, when you apply it to multiple things, when you apply it across time, that is culture.
Yeah, yeah.
A lot of people don't actually know how to define culture because it is in fact pretty nebulous.
Mhm.
To me, again, it does boil down to our narrative and our choice making, which is
Yeah.
the same as mindset, but mindset can be seen as more
Mm,
situational. Culture is just
absolutely.
more pervasive.
Yeah, it is. It is. I mean, I have joined transformations where people have been not so happy because they haven't been part of the process.
Hmm.
They have, things have been reshuffled, they have not been carried along. And as coaches, we have come in to, coach them into this new structure and, mindset and ways of doing things. So, like you said, we need to start with leadership and we need to carry people along. People need to, I mean, there was something you said somewhere in your book. You said, listen to your team, listen to their concerns. And that must start from the very beginning.
Yes, early on, before you even commit to going agile,
Yeah.
they will have concerns. And if you're in a non-software space, their concerns will be different from those of people in the tech space.
Hmm. Absolutely. It will be totally different. Totally
Yes.
different. Now, I like this one. If psychological safety is a precondition for agility,
Hmm.
it seems this was modeled by the 17 in the creation of the manifesto. Now, the $1 million question is, are we mostly creating safe spaces, even in Agile today?
Yes and no. More than we did 10 years ago, definitely more than we did 20 years ago.
Mm. But we can do more.
We can do more. The thing is, it is so easy to destroy safety.
Hmm.
Building it, just like with trust, it takes time, it's gradual, it's symmetric, and so on. But destroying it is so easy. We have
But
seen
is
this.
building it so easy though? Is it easy to build
No.
psychological safety? Because when we talk about psychological safety, we're talking about if you look at the four patterns of psychological safety, we're
Mhm.
talking about inclusion. We talk about diversity and inclusion a lot. We get diversity, but we hardly get inclusion. Let's not forget that. We talk about collaboration. We talk about challenging the status quo. That's what psychological safety is all about. And it's not always easy to do.
Uh, If I said that it's easy, I definitely do not mean it, but it is. But destroying it is
Yeah,
easy.
it's easy.
Destroying
Yeah,
it is easy through what the leaders do and also what they don't do.
yeah, yeah.
You can see examples of this. People are posting about this online. Going back to the office or not, or hybrid, or we don't know. And there is so much that leaders are doing now that is hurting safety. A year ago, so we're now what, March 22? A year ago, people are starting to think, yeah, we'll go back to the office and this and that. And every organization is now releasing policies. And a few months ago, I think they stopped releasing policies because they realized that they don't really know and they can't really know.
Mm.
But those policies initially did a lot of damage. Presumably, they gave people some, I'm not going to call it safety, it's comfort because they know what's going to happen. But there was so little consultation with everybody and so much pushback that they, in many cases, they did more harm than good.
Hmm.
What actually, speaking about that, a year before that, so March 2020, the entire world shuts down and so on. Several of the biggest employers here in Canada went public saying, We will not fire anyone because of the pandemic. I mean, the subtext was still, if you're incompetent, you should probably look for other employment. But that makes sense.
Yeah.
But people were legitimately worried what would happen to my job and
Mm-hmm.
the online and work from home and all of that stuff. And some of them banks, for instance, they said, no, don't worry about that. I have friends who work in those corporations, and like they were visibly more relaxed. When people are more relaxed, they can contribute more meaningfully.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And people have actually been much more productive at home, to be honest, because when you cut out all that commuting time, most of us are putting in that time into even more work. And like you said, people are relaxed, people are in a better state of mind, and life is better because you're not spending 4 hours in traffic or whatever. And you because you're in that better state of mind, you are performing better. So I mean, at the end of the day, we should be looking at outcomes, not button chairs.
That's true. What's interesting, though, is that a lot of what you just said right now, those are beliefs,
Mm,
right? And when we go back to the matter of mindset, values, beliefs, principles,
mm-hmm,
one of the beliefs people had, especially CEOs and such, going into the pandemic was
mm-hmm.
people in the office are more productive than at home. That was a belief. We have
That's
proven
it.
that that is not, well, we haven't proven it conclusively as we do with mathematical theorems,
Mm-hmm,
but there is a lot of evidence and a lot of indications of where that is in fact true. But maybe there's another belief that is useful to
mm,
us, which is we can be productive,
mm-hmm,
but we can also be lonely. And
mm-hmm.
that can be more damaging. I'm not seeing any talk about that. All,
Right.
all I'm seeing is discussion at the level of productivity, at the level
Mm-hmm,
of personal preference, but I'm not seeing any discussion about the effects of loneliness, the effects of barely seeing anyone in 3D.
mm.
And I think, and this is again a belief, it is not
Yeah.
proven,
Yeah.
maybe it's not provable, that a lot of what we want in Agile in terms of the interaction, individuals and interactions,
Mm-hmm.
the collaboration, and so on, I think we're actually hurting some because we're only meeting virtually.
Right. Right. And this is where we need to, I mean, if some people have a preference to meet virtually, I think that's okay. But I like that, some organizations are now saying we can do hybrid. So if you feel you need to go into the office, you have that option. If you want to work more from home, you also have that option. But for me, I mean, I'm just using this opportunity to, really emphasize the fact that we really, as agilists, as organizations, especially today, with the way things just are, we really need to ask ourselves, because I mean, when we talk about psychological safety, it's not just a function for leadership, it's not a
Mm,
responsibility for leadership alone, it's for
right.
everybody. So if we want safe spaces, we can't just wish it. Okay, we also need to ask ourselves, how can I make the space in which I work safer? What does my action or inaction do to safety in the team with that I belong? We really need to ask ourselves those questions. And you wrote a book about the human side of agile. I mean, I haven't got that copy, but that's definitely a copy I'm definitely going to buy, because for me, when I came into the agile space, like I said just before we came live, the values and principles really, really, connected with me. I really, really, really resonated with me, because for me, I could see how this mindset could serve humanity. So for me, it was already beyond agile when I looked at those principles. And we can see evidence of a lack of safety, what is happening in Russia and Ukraine today. So we need to take this mindset beyond, take it everywhere, and emphasize more on psychological safety. It is so important. Now, let's talk about your books. Let's talk about your books. You've written 3 books,
Yes.
and someone, by the way, has just bought a copy of your book, if I'm not mistaken. I think I read something just now. Just bought a copy from Amazon. That's cool. I've been more in the technology space, and I hope this will help scale my knowledge in the non-software space. Excellent, Mary. Your channel continues. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Michael,
So,
thank you.
so back to my questions. You've written 3 books. The human side of Agile, for me, it's so important. Tell us what motivated you to write your first book.
I wrote it in 2011. It came out in 2012. I had noticed that I was getting pretty good results coaching teams and creating agility and really transforming the experience for many of my clients. And I noticed that it had very little to do with process.
Hmm.
This was, I started in extreme programming. I never actually was a practitioner who used Scrum. Scrum wasn't that popular when I started. It became popular once I started coaching. And around 2011, people were getting certified left, right, and center. Everybody's talking about it. It's the prime thing in conferences and so on, even though it had been around for a while, but now people are noticing. And I'm looking at all of this and I'm saying, my teams, we did different things, but we're agile.
Exactly.
And I poked into it and I looked for what made the difference. And what made the difference was helping teams grow into awesome teams,
Hmm.
as opposed to bringing them process and hoping that that would make a difference.
All the tools.
Or the tools. You know what? Even the tools. I was never much into tools, to be honest.
Hmm.
I was, when I, paid my attention to things, it was more the practices and the process. And
Hmm.
also, I was working a lot with developers because I had been a developer for so long, and I was doing a lot of technical coaching and so on. And I noticed that really it was all about the interactions, the engagement, the leadership of a team. So I started writing a book to the
Hmm.
people who were getting the most beating, the project managers. And my point was, you can shift your approach to helping the team succeed as opposed to managing to the deliverable. And while writing the book, I realized this isn't actually about project managers. This is actually about team level leadership, which can come from anywhere.
Yeah.
And actually, the whole thing extends higher up. That, when I was writing the book, people were still writing online that the role of management was to supply food and get out of the way. We talked like this.
Hmm.
And in hindsight, this is not only disrespectful, it made no sense at all. It's like, yeah, we got to keep those managers on the payroll because, like, what can we do? Like, no, it doesn't make any sense. And so the book actually started with the subtitle and the title reversed. It was all about how to help your team succeed. And then somebody told me, that subtitle, The Human Side of Agile, that should be the title.
That should be the title.
And I was like, I was shocked. And I was so happy I had met the person who, who
Mm.
suggested that. So that's how the book came along. And at the time, it was maybe one of 3 or 4 that even
Mhm.
talked about Agile having a human side.
Absolutely, because the focus was so much on delivery. And even today, we still have organizations that are caught up in that build trap, right? They're
Mhm,
totally caught up in that build trap. And like you said earlier on, I mean, a lot of people think once you're doing Scrum, you're doing Agile, right?
mhm,
Once you're doing Scrum, you're Agile. But your book and even the one on, Agile for non-software teams really emphasizes the fact that it's, way beyond processes and tools, but that we need to be looking at the values. We need to be looking at the people side of things. We need to be looking at the human side of things. And when we talk about principles, this is so important because the agile values and principles talks about face-to-face interaction.
mhm.
And then COVID came along,
Yeah.
right? And we had to adapt.
Mhm,
So what does face-to-face mean today in the agile space? That was why when we even went online, we started to look for better ways to collaborate online.
mhm,
Now, even when we talk about the tools, in as much as we're saying individuals and interaction about processes and tools, the tools came in very, very handy because we then had to use Zoom. We had to use a mural,
mhm. Yes.
all the tools came very, very useful, but still individuals and interactions over processes and tools. It didn't make the tools much more important than the people side of things in any shape or form.
Right. look, we went into this because we had no choice.
Yes.
Fortunately, we had tools. If the pandemic happened a decade ago, we'd be in a much poorer state
Yeah, absolutely.
because all we had was effectively conference calls, right?
Mm,
And maybe the occasional sharing of a screen. I did that in 2004, remote pair programming over
yeah,
shared screen and Skype.
yeah,
Remember
yeah,
Skype?
absolutely.
So we went into this. Fortunately, we had good tools. But
Yeah.
again, when we think from a perspective of principles, if we try to build an environment where people want to work together,
Hmm.
that they have interest in a shared deliverable,
Hmm.
that they have the space, the opportunity to bring their best selves to work, and all of that, then we customize the environment.
That is it.
But this is different from starting backward by saying you have to be co-located. Oh,
Hmm.
since you can't be co-located, what's the next best thing? That's backwards.
That's backwards. Yes, absolutely. And you've
Or
just hit the nail on the head there for me. Again, it's about the people. It's about when I go into engagements, one of the things I say is, look, if by the time I leave, you're able to have, created a system of work that works for your context,
mhm,
you can show
exactly.
up and have difficult conversation. The
Mhm,
environment feels safe for you. You can contribute, you can learn, you can ask questions without feeling, unsafe. You can challenge the status quo because nobody knows what holds 3 months down the line. So, whatever it is you're doing today or what you did 3 months ago may well be changing in the next 3 weeks. So, even without the presence of an agile coach in your midst, how can you regroup, have the difficult conversations, and leverage whatever tools or ways of working you need to leverage to get back on track and
mhm.
remain competitive in your sector. So for me, that is I'm just in alignment with what you're saying there. It is so important, so
Yes.
important. And we are coming to the top of the hour, and we have a comment here from one of our audience, Ronke. I reckon organizations should have conversations to decide way forward in terms of remote working versus on-site working and not impose. Absolutely, absolutely. Some are having it, I believe, but some are not necessarily
Yes.
having that conversation. Yeah. I remember reading the Business Agility Institute newsletter and how, a lot of, I mean, we must give credit to a lot of leaders. A lot of leaders during the pandemic did show up. They really did become, they took on that role model space in terms of,
Yes.
modeling the right leadership. But for some, it was how can we put spyware on their laptop?
Yes, I remember that. Now, to be fair,
Mhm.
it was a very tough time to be a leader.
Very tough. Very tough.
Leadership is really tested in times of trouble. This
Yes.
was an extreme time of trouble.
It was. It was.
And so that some leader responded in unhelpful ways, I'm
Yeah.
not surprised.
Hmm.
In some cases, it's organizational pressure. In some cases, it's habit.
Hmm.
But maybe the world is becoming a little bit better.
Okay. We have just one more question before we call it a day. I'm curious to know what Gil thinks in the single biggest threat is the single biggest threat to Agile.
Oh, I don't know if I can answer a single biggest threat. There are lots of threats.
Yeah.
One is the threat of standardization,
Mm. Mm.
right? Here's your standard process, your standard Jira, sorry, standard tool, substitute Jira, and so on. Um, and it's not a knock on Jira, but everybody uses it in quite the same way. And I see too many people bending to make the tool happy as opposed to the other way around. So that is one threat. Another threat is that companies actually settle for mediocrity.
Mm.
They have some process going on, kind of looks okay, kind of walks and quacks like Agile. So yeah, it's fine. That's enough. Good enough. Um, Other threats. Well, here's one. Even with all the successes we're having, people are still never happy and and still knocking it left, right, and center. Now, it's not that Agile is an ideal. It's not that with it All our problems are now solved, but it's pretty good compared to what we had before.
Absolutely.
So maybe we can be satisfied with what we have and think respectfully of what we could do better.
I think it's just about inspecting and adapting and listening to people who work in those contexts and hearing from them. I think that helps. Now we have to draw the curtain. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for spending, your time with me today. Thank you to our audience. We will be back next Sunday. Until then, stay awesome, everyone. Thank you very much, Gil. I'm grateful. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye bye, everyone.